Okay, good morning, everyone, and welcome to this week's Let's Talk Dairy. So, might seem a bit early to be talking about this subject, but there's huge interest in breeding very early on in 2022, and obviously driven by, I suppose, a small bit by the availability of sex semen through the new lab that's operating in Moore Park currently. There's huge interest in terms of trying to get onto the bulls that are available sexed, and I suppose as we move forward in the whole sustainability era in relation to Frisian bull calves and Jersey bull calves, etc., sexed has become more important. But that aside, so when we talk about sex, we're probably looking at a situation where we would be suggesting that people would use synchronization, but there's also a role for synchronization for dealing with the usual suspects, as they refer to them in Munster bovine. So the problem cows that I've spoken about back in February, the cows that have your milk fevers, your retained clearings, all those that may have slightly reduced reproductive function in advance of the breeding season. And we would be recommending that people would consider using synchronization protocols, maybe, or possibly need to use synchronization protocols on some of those cows to get them cycling in advance of the breeding season. If you go back a few years ago, we would have talked about maybe going through the early stages of the breeding season and then following up with these animals that hadn't shown. But we would be, in terms of trying to drive 6-week calving rate, we would suggest that you would go in a little bit earlier and in advance of the breeding season in a lot of cases, so that you can maximize the number of opportunities that those cows that have had issues during the season get to actually go and calf. And as you know, the cost of rearing replacements at €1,500, and costs increasing the way things are at the minute as well, it's going to be important to try and retain as many cows in the herd as you can. And obviously higher age of lactation, or so longer lactations within the herd, increases the milk produced from the farm as well. So for that reason, I've asked Stephen Moore, who's a reproductive physiologist in Teagasc Moore Park, to come on and talk about the various options around synchronization for both heifers, cows, for sex semen, and for just conventional semen use, where we'd be using it on problem cows. Okay, so Stephen's going to go through a few slides in relation to the different protocols, and it's very important that people are careful in relation to this because in a lot of cases we find that there are mistakes made in terms of the protocol, how they're implemented at farm level. So maybe mistakes made around the injections and the timings and the days that they're given, and people need to be very cautious of that. So you have to identify the program that you're going to use first, and then make sure that you follow through on it. And I suppose, Stephen, you'll be using the day 0, day 10 kind of scenario here, but when people do sit down to do this program, it's very important that you write out the dates. If you're starting on Monday, the 25th of April or whatever it's going to be, that you write out that it's whatever the next day is that you're to do it, and write down the date as well, so that we're very clear on what has to happen. I suppose people that have drafting gates and can set them up are in a fortuitous position that they can automatically arrange for that to happen, and it can happen without having to remember it on the day. But it's very, very important that the program that's chosen is implemented fully and correctly in order to have success with it. Because invariably, I would say, Stephen, that what we would meet on the ground is that where people say that it hasn't been a success for them, it's actually because of human error rather than a problem with the program. So I'll let you go through your slides there, and as I said, we'll encourage people to ask questions that they might have in relation to it. So thanks, Stephen, for coming on.
Thanks, Stuart, and good morning, everyone. So yeah, I think I'll start with the heifer programs, and just to, everyone is, I guess, at this stage pretty familiar with the options for just using prostaglandin. So in this type of program, what it involves is obviously heat detection for 7 days, okay, and breeding off of the heats, and then any heifer not served in the first 7 days gets a shot of prostaglandin. Those heifers that got shot of prostaglandin will come in over the next 2 to 5 days and be inseminated, okay? But then there might be some heifers that did not still respond to that prostaglandin, and they will get a second shot of prostaglandin 11 days after the first one, okay? They can then be set up for a sort of a timed AI with that, so that they get an insemination 72 and 96 hours after that second shot of prostaglandin, if they don't come into heat. A few points to remember this protocol is that it will only work in heifers that are cycling, and it is obviously better when they are in target weights, okay? So in this type of protocol, 1/3 of heifers are going to come in the first week, and get inseminated. 2/3 will get the prostaglandin, okay, and they'll all be inseminated over in the first 3 weeks of breeding, okay, with most of them inseminated in the first 10 days, okay. So
Stephen, can you explain how it's kind of okay to AI there, even though they may not have shown heat on that second PG? They're just
yeah. So I guess there's a huge level of guesswork going into that, okay, because they haven't shown a reference heat that we don't know when they're actually going to ovulate, okay. Yeah. We're hoping that they will still ovulate, so it is possible for them to ovulate without having shown a heat. But because we don't know when exactly that is going to happen, that is the reason for the requirement for 2 inseminations, the 72 hours and the 96 hours afterwards, okay?
And reproductively then, kind of crazy question maybe, is there any issues with those animals longer term if they haven't shown an active standing heat, that they're going to be potentially problematic cows into the future, even if you do get them in calf in that first season, like?
Yeah, well, I guess you think about it depends on the reason that they weren't cycling in the first place. Yes, okay, so if they weren't cycling because they were underweight, then that's a management issue. Yeah. If they were on target weights and generally healthy but still not cycling, that would hint towards probably a genetic issue, that maybe you don't want to breed replacements from that small proportion of heifers anyway. Realistically, it's only going to be, maybe it should be less than 10%. Yeah. Generally it doesn't really that's kind of the maximum. It really doesn't still happen that often, I suppose. So that's kind of the numbers that we'll be dealing with
so the insemination after the 3 days and after the 4 days is just trying to extend the window of opportunity for the semen to actually meet the ovulation, basically.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. But it is, and so to bear in mind, I guess, is just the fact that they haven't shown a heat does mean that they would still be less likely to go in calf, even though they are inseminated. Okay. But it's still worth a shot insemination them. Okay.
Yeah.
So moving on then, I guess, so that's, the
standard PG protocol.
Standard PG protocol. Yeah. There's a considerable amount of labor and heat observation involved with that protocol. Okay.
Yeah, you're looking at definitely in the region of probably 14 to 15 days of in and out to crush.
Yeah. And there's the time spent observing them, and then there's the time spent trying to understand which ones are actually in heat, okay? Yeah. Because that is tricky with heifers. Yeah. So I guess the next option there then is to go down the fixed time route, okay? Mm-hmm. So to just kind of go through this protocol, so the way it's set up is that day 0 will be mating start date, the day that you want to inseminate these heifers. It's an 8-day protocol, so it has to start 8 days before the start of AI. In the timed AI protocols, it'll work whether the heifers are cycling or not. And because it's a timed AI, all of them will get inseminated. So you have a 100% submission rate with these protocols. So 8 days before mating start date, they get the progesterone device inserted, and they get a shot of the GnRH, okay? That progesterone device stays in for 6 days. So it needs to be removed 2 days before mating start date. With these protocols, there's 2 shots of prostaglandin involved. The first shot 3 days before, and then the second shot 2 days before the insemination, okay? And then on the day of AI, which would be 2 days afterwards, those heifers can be inseminated at the fixed time, and they need to get another shot of the GnRH. So with this type of protocol, you're basically going to be bringing the heifers in 4 times, okay?
Yeah. And 100% are served is probably the important thing to point out there as well. So on the 4th day, you're done and dusted for that first round of AI with that group.
Yeah. Yeah, and like that's a big advantage, around breeding time. From a labor point of view, it's only 4 times that you need to bring them in.
Yeah.
So this protocol, does work very well with heifers. I think some people have been asking about the reason for the 2 shots of prostaglandin in these protocols.
Yeah.
And that has, I guess, been a recent addition in the past couple of years. Traditionally, we just use 1 shot of prostaglandin. It is now 2 shots of prostaglandin. And the reason for that is that in about kind of 10 to 20% of heifers or cows, that they don't respond to the first shot of prostaglandin. And if they don't respond, they're not going to have, they will have incomplete luteal regression, and they're not going to show a strong heat and go in calf. So by giving that second shot of prostaglandin, it's increasing conception rates by about 5 to 10%.
Okay, very good. So there's just one question there as well, Stephen, on this now, and it's a valid one actually. Does it have to be a vet that inserts the seed, or would it be best practice that a vet would do it?
No, so the seeder and the injections are their prescription. There's a prescription required for them, but vets are not required to do this work.
Yeah.
Once the farm is set up, which taking particularly with the seeder, that it's done hygienically, that the heifers and cows are washed down, and having some buckets of water with disinfectant and some paper towel, then it can be done quite easily.
And that's a very important point for both cows and heifers, that the hygiene around doing this process is important, because you can actually create uterine infections if it's done badly, which is going to compromise your operations completely then, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. So because the progesterone from the seeder device, it affects the immune system, it can really, I guess, the cows, if there is any, dirt or feces going in, it'll create an inflammatory response that will have a negative impact on the fertility.
Yeah, so you'll actually get an infection and possibly discharges as a result of dirty brids or seeders.
Yeah. Now, some of that will happen naturally from the device, okay. but if there's material gone in there that shouldn't be in there, it will be much worse.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So that's kind of what it is with the heifers.
And again, I suppose just Stephen to point out there that there's a difference in that program in terms of the time that the prid or the seeder is in there relative to what you're going to talk about with the cows in a minute.
The cows, yeah.
That's very important that people are aware of that.
Yes. So yeah, this protocol is like it's 8 days. It's 8 days from start to finish, and whereas with the cows it's 10 days from start to finish. Okay. Yeah. And with this protocol, the prid is in for a full 6 days. Okay.
Yeah.
It'll be in for longer, with the cows. Okay.
Yeah.
That's something to bear in mind, I guess, if everything is done cows and heifers on the same day.
Yeah, I suppose the reason I'm harping on about it is, as I said at the outset there, it's very important that people are conscious of what program they're doing and what way it is to be implemented. And just because you're inserting a seeder, and because if this is your first year using a seeder in a heifer scenario, that there is a difference in the 2 programs. So to be very clear that within 8 days, you have the whole lot done in this situation. And as you said, Stephen, it's going to 10 days for the cow situation. So
another thing to just bear in mind with the seeder depredator is that the heifers, they tend to, I guess, be play acting a bit, and they are more likely to actually pull the string. So usually with heifers, what we would do is that we would cut the string.
Very, very short, or cut it off completely, honest, Steve?
To be honest, you cut it quite short. It doesn't need to be removed completely, but it just, you
don't want the tail hanging out that's going to be cutting them out basically and pulling
out. Or irritating the tail, because then that can irritate the heifers as well. So normally the string should be pointed downwards as well. It shouldn't be sticking up.
Okay.
So then moving on to the cows, I guess, and this protocol, as mentioned, it's 10 days, right? This is suitable for non-cycling cows, and it's like these problem cows that we talked about when if we want to haven't been cycling beforehand. And this is also the same protocol that you would use for synchronizing group of animals, whether if you wanted to use sex semen, for instance. So I guess there's a few criteria here in terms of selecting the animals. Ideally, they would be at least 40 days calved when starting the protocol. So that means it's a 10-day protocol. So no animals less than 50 days would actually be inseminated with this. Going earlier will reduce the success of the program and compromise the results. You know, so it's a 10-day protocol. You know, day 0 here would be mating start date, and we're going back 10 days. The progesterone device is being inserted, and they're getting the injection of the GnRH. Then 3 days and 2 days before the mating start date, they get the two shots of prostaglandin. Those for the reasons that I explained earlier in terms of make sure luteal regression. And then it's really important that like the progesterone device is removed from every animal that it was inserted into. You know, you do need to keep a count of these. You know, how many did you put in? Count how many did you get out when you've gone through the group of animals. And because if it's not removed, they're not going to come into heat. They're not going to ovulate, and the program will be a complete waste of time. So then the day before that they come into heat, that evening before then, at around 5 p.m., they need to get a injection of the GnRH. This is to create an LH surge so that the cows will ovulate. And then on the following morning, they get a timed EI, regardless of whether they have shown a heat or not. So I guess in terms of the timing I guess can be changed in terms of depending on when the technician is going to come. You know, if the technician is coming at 9, all of these events should be kind of happening at 9 in the morning, with the exception of the GnRH injection the evening before. But if it's 10 o'clock, then you just need to adjust these times. But there is, you know, the intervals are between the injections are important.
Okay, so your 5 o'clock GnRH has to go a little bit later if you're going to be later in the serving the following morning. So it has to be, it could be 6 or it could be 7 that day.
Yeah. So yeah, exactly. Yeah. So with this type of protocol, it's what you're seeing the cows obviously twice a day anyway at milking at each milking. So they're going to be brought in anyway, but there's going to be basically 5 days of either injections or with the 4 days with injections, and then the day that they get inseminated.
Okay, and so again, as I said there at the start as well, we spoke to Donald Patton last year. I think you were actually on with him as well, Steve, the same day maybe. But Donald, they have a drafting gate obviously in Ballyhaise, and they're able to program the drafting, the dates of the drafting. So when he starts the Cedar protocol program with any cows, he sets up all the dates that are coming out, whether it's morning or evening, and they're drafted automatically. Because again, as I said, generally the mistakes that are made are probably people start the program, we'll say we come to day -3, or maybe, more than likely day -3 is going to be the first mistake that will be made. And cows are gone out to the field again when we remember that we were supposed to inject these cows today. So if you can make either setting reminders on the phone in advance, or if you have the fortuitous situation of having the drafting gate that you can set up to draft cows, then it means that the program will be done exactly as it says on the tin, basically, which is key. Like, these programs work when they're done correctly, Stephen. Isn't that very fair point to make? Like,
yeah, definitely. I think a few other tips in terms of, you know, I suppose organizing yourself when you're in the middle of this is that, you know, either, you know, they need to be easily identifiable. So one option is to put a strip of tail paint along their backs, or, you know, put tape on them somewhere so that they're easily identified in the milking parlor. And then obviously, like, up at the whiteboard in the milking parlor, write up, you know, what needs to happen on each day, just so you're looking at it the whole time, and you won't forget about it. Okay. And I suppose another maybe option, depending on if you've the option of keeping depending, I suppose, on the numbers that have been done, is to keep them as a separate group from the rest of the herd, you know, and you can just deal with that.
And just coming back to the 40 days in milk as well, Stephen, then we'll say that'll be okay for the problem cows, that they wouldn't be served before 50 days. But if you're using it for sex there, you'd probably prefer if they were a little bit longer calved, would you?
Yeah, well, definitely. So one of the biggest factors that's going to improve or to affect the fertility of the cows is how long they've calved. So the longer that they have calved, the higher their fertility will be.
Yeah.
And with sex, yeah, you are right that ideally they would be longer calved. So like in reality, if you're targeting animals for sex semen, I suppose you really are trying to focus on the February calvers,
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I suppose, yeah, we can, I suppose, maybe talk a bit about sex semen now. I think maybe if in terms of how these protocols, in terms of these protocols and sex semen, one thing that's an advantage is, I guess that we've done some work that would indicate there's an advantage, is slightly delaying the time of the insemination.
Yeah.
So, for example, with this protocol where everything is happening at 9 a.m., that for instance, if the animals are inseminated closer to midday, or in the early afternoon, there is, in the work we've done, that there is slight improvement in the pregnancy rate. When we did it, it wasn't statistically significant, but numerically at least there was a slight improvement. I suppose just going back to the heifers, then often, which is it might suit the AI technician to do the heifers in the afternoon or the evening when they're quieter. So I guess we started doing some work last year with tying the eye and heifers, and by with the protocol similar protocol that I just outlined there a few minutes ago. And when we delayed the insemination until around 5 o'clock in the evening time, we got around a 5 to 8% improvement in conception rate with the heifers with sex semen.
Okay.
So then, I guess, so then in terms of, I suppose, in terms of dealing with sex semen, and it goes for all, like, really with sex or conventional, there's some factors that you can use to identify your most fertile animals. Okay, so in terms of the heifers, they need to be on target live weight, body condition score greater 3 or greater, and regularly cycling. In terms of the cows, then, particularly with sex semen, talking about the younger cows, so the first, second, third, maybe fourth lactation, at least 50 days, as you mentioned, probably closer to 60 days in milk at the time of insemination. They need to be in good body condition score. They should be the cows that you've seen regularly cycling, since calving, and that they didn't have any health issues. So no milk fever, ketosis, lameness, mastitis. These are big no-nos for sex semen. In terms of the expected conception rates, then, with heifers, if you're going to expect a conception rate with conventional semen heifers of 70%, the best you can probably hope for is 60% with sex. And with the cows, then, if you're expecting kind of 60% with conventional, you're talking about 50% with sex semen.
Stephen, I suppose not to confuse but question there from Pierce Breen is what is considered an acceptable conception rate on fixed time versus conventional, in terms of, and when he says conventional there, I mean standard, we'll say just picking up natural services, basically. That's not necessarily targeted at fixed. The question came in earlier now when you were talking about the heifer protocols, we'll say, so or the fixed time protocols there. So if we leave out the sex semen element out of it, are we going to see any major difference between serving to natural heats versus fixed time?
So if the heifers are synchronized and if they show a heat, okay, so the majority of them will show a heat, okay, of the heifers that are synchronized. You can inseminate regardless of whether they show a heat or not. But the heifers that do show a heat will have slightly higher conception rates than the synchronized heifers that don't show a heat. But the heifers that are synchronized that show a heat will have the same conception rates as heifers that show the heat naturally and were inseminated. Okay.
So there's no difference, but your submission rate is higher basically. So
Yeah,
and there is
absolutely,
a
yeah.
risk that there will be lower conception in the ones that haven't shown the heat. So if
Haven't you?
if everything goes normal and they show the heat, there's no difference.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah,
Yeah.
sorry, no, just when you mentioned the
Oh,
conception rates there, I just felt it was
I
a
think
kind of a
I think
point to bring
we're
in again. So
yeah.
so again, you're saying there that you're expecting kind of kind of 80 to 85, 90% relative conception rate there is kind of acceptable. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it has been in the studies that we've done. That's what we're achieving.
Thereabouts, yeah.
So yeah, I suppose in terms of using synchronization with sex semen, really, if it's the case that there is a specific group of animals that you want to use sex semen on, okay, then really it just makes complete sense to synchronize them, okay. And but I suppose you do need to bear in mind that there's some logistics around the synchronization, and definitely that the technician does need to know that you're thinking about doing this, and that you're going to need to arrange a date and a time that's going to suit them in advance. So definitely, I wouldn't consider doing any synchronization until you've talked to the technician about it, that they're going to be, so that they be prepared for it, to be honest, and that they can arrange it.
No point in doing it if you haven't someone to put in the straws at the end of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, definitely. Is it going to be the case that yourself and your neighbors and all your neighbors are going to want to do it the same day? That's just not going to be practical, and it's not going to be fair to the technician, and you're not going to get good results because the timings will be off. Yeah. So organization is important, and particularly if these protocols, they can be set up to facilitate an evening insemination, which might suit some of the technicians that when they're quieter. You need excellent records, because you need to know the animals that you're not going to use sex semen on, okay? And then when they are synchronized, they need to be clearly identified so that you know which animals have been done. And you need to stick to these protocols. The protocols work when they're followed to the T. And I guess the other thing is that sometimes people play around with these protocols. They do something a day earlier or a few hours later, and I suppose what we're talking about today, we have done ourselves and we know works, and has been done around the world and we know works. The protocols that we're talking about, they've been designed, and we're talking about them for a reason, because they work. But playing around with them is a recipe for disaster when you don't know the biology, I suppose, and so you need to stick with what's in the protocol. And then in terms of so there is a labor requirement when you're implementing these protocols. You need help bringing them in. You need help when they're being inseminated, to get them through the crush in a quick time. And then come calving time, you do need to make sure that you have the calving facilities. I suppose one thing to bear in mind is that even though you've got a group of heifers and they're going to get, inseminated all on the same day, okay, 50 to 60% of them will go and calve. But even all of those cows are not going to calve on the same day. There's going to be a spread of, a week to 10 days. Okay. So I guess that's something that people are sometimes worried about, but in practice, they don't all calve on the same day. And as long as you have the facilities and the people available, like the help in the springtime, it's very manageable. And with the synchronization, it is doable.
Okay, very good. So just actually, you just kind of mentioned it there in terms of the having the help available for the AI piece of it as well. So a question in there is, given the time needed to thaw the straw and serve a heifer, what's the maximum number of heifers you would do in a fixed time AI window? Is that probably dependent on the number of technicians you have available to you, really, isn't it?
Yeah, and how many you need to do. But like okay, so it's going to take a bit longer than if you're just using conventional semen. So you're talking about thawing 2 straws at a time and getting them into the animal as quickly as possible.
Be it the heifer or the cow, like, yeah.
Yeah, and so we're talking about sex now, and so I think, the insemination done over a few, 2-3 hours is fine.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
In reality, like when we've done these studies and we talk about, the insemination supposed to happen at 9 o'clock. In reality, it takes, when we've done with hundreds of animals to inseminate, it takes hours.
Yeah.
Okay. But and it still works. Okay. So there is a window there, of maybe 4 hours or so, particularly with conventional. And I suppose what we're seeing maybe with the sex is that window just needs to be delayed a bit. I suppose an important thing to bear in mind with sex is that the recommendation from sexing technologies is that the insemination is done 14 to 20 hours after the onset of the standing heat. And that's really important. And I suppose I might just mention, since I didn't mention it earlier, if you're not synchronizing, okay, so if you're using sex semen and you're checking heats, okay, it's really only the cow, it's only the animals that are suitable for insemination. I suppose it's very much dictated by when the technician can come to you, okay? But if the technician is only coming once a day in the morning time, it's really only the heifers or cows that started showing heats the evening before, the afternoon and evening before, that are going to be suitable for insemination the following morning. Sometimes, we've been hearing cases where a cow is seen in heat for the first time during the morning milking and being inseminated with a sex straw, even, let's say, at 4:30, 5, 6 o'clock that evening. And really, that is still too early, okay? So your option there, though, is really that those animals that you're seeing for the first time in heat, you're in the morning time, if the technician is only coming once a day, that they should just get a conventional straw, okay? And that the sex straws can be used on the cows and heifers that you've seen in heat the evening before, because they're more likely to be in that 14 to 20 hour window.
Very good. So just one last question. A little bit surprised by this now, Stephen, but maybe you will be too. But mentioning the hygiene of the seeders, should they be in a sterile package when collected from the vet? Because this person says that there's the ones that they get aren't usually, and they often wonder, is that an issue?
I guess it might depend on how many they're purchasing at a time. So one brand comes in a packs of 10, and another brand are individually wrapped. And I think, in terms of I mean, usually what we would do is that when we're prior to inserting them on the morning, we will rinse them in a bucket of disinfected water. With chlorhexidine, hibiscus, for example.
Okay.
And that'll just to make sure that they are clean before inserting them.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. So I suppose messages are that there's huge labor savings around the use of the synchronization protocols. Probably for people that are thinking or considering going down the route of sexed for the first time, you would say that it would be almost a strong recommendation that they would consider this, because otherwise is it making it just logistically very difficult to who is eligible, who is not eligible. Like if people are experienced at this, maybe it's okay. But if you're trying to, in the heat of battle, basically we'll describe it as in the height of the start of the AI season, they're trying to say that this one is eligible for sex, this one isn't, might be just too much of a risk or a lottery to be, so that you might be better off just fix that group that you want to try it on, or fix the heifers to remove the labor element around them, and especially the kind of variability that you're seeing in relation to the when they're coming on heat and so forth. And then just to implement the protocols correctly, and that there shouldn't be the only issue with using these fixed time AI protocols in terms of conception rate is if you're using a sex straw, you're going to have a slightly lower, or potentially going to have a slightly lower conception rate than you would with a conventional. But when you compare conventional versus conventional in terms of fixed time AI versus natural service, there should be no difference. Is that a fair
Yeah.
summary?
No, if the protocols are followed to the T, you will expect a similar relative. It's what you can expect in your own farm. You should achieve similar results when they're synchronized, and it's done properly. Yeah.
Okay, so as I said, it may seem early to people to be talking about this, but there is a bit of logistical stuff to be done in relation to getting products and getting people lined up, and even getting the straws is going to be important if people are going down the route of sexing. Even though there's a huge amount of bulls being sexed this year, the opportunity, or maybe there may not be as many straws as people may think, so you might need to be booking them. So from that point of view, it's going to be it's timely to cover it now. Actually, just one last question, Stephen, after coming in. So on heifers with fixed time AI, using sexed straws, serve them in the late afternoon rather than at the 9 a.m. on the protocol. Would that be it's actually not 9 a.m. on that protocol that you had there now, it's actually just 48 hours after the injection. So you could kind of tee up if you are going sexed, you could tee it up in order to make sure that your AI is occurring at that 14 to 20 hour window instead, isn't it?
Well, the way it's set up here, I suppose this is if I was set up for conventional. If you were going to go down the route of the sex semen with the heifers using this protocol, and everything was happening at 9 a.m. and you wanted to delay the insemination till the afternoon, all of this work would still happen in the morning time. Okay.
Yeah.
What we have found is that you need to bring them in on the day of AI. You need to still bring them in the morning and give them the shot of GnRH, and let them back out again and bring them back in again in the evening time. Okay. So when we did that, okay, we got an 8% higher pregnancy rate compared with giving the GnRH and in doing the insemination in the morning time. Okay. So that's work we did last year, and we're going to repeat it this year, to build our numbers and our confidence around it.
Okay. Super. That's great, Stephen. Thanks very much for coming on. We won't be on next week, folks, because it's Patrick's Day and we'll be taking that day off anyway. So we'll be back on the 24th, and we'll do a grass update at that stage, because we'll be following up on where we're sitting in relative terms to our grazing targets at that stage. So I wish you all well for the next fortnight, and we'll see you in 2 weeks' time. And thanks again, Stephen, for coming on.
Thanks, everyone.